الله الرحمن الرحيم. والحمد لله. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. والحمد لله. النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم قال لا تجوز شهادة الظالمين ولا قريب ولا إنسان ولا جارية ولا غمر ولا أثيم ورد شهادة القانع أهل البيت رواه أبو داود. وطول القانع بن سعيد and his father from his grandfather. Allah be pleased with him. The Nabi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam said that the testimony of deceitful men included accepted for the exam or men or women accepted of the one who is both righteous and honest father and they rejected the testimony of the one who defended his family for Allah.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. عن عمرو بن شعيب عن أبيه عن جده عن النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم لا تجوز شهادة خائن ولا خائنة ولا زان ولا زانية ولا ذي غمر على أخيه ورد شهادة القانع لأهل البيت. رواه أبو داود. Sayyidina Amr ibn Shu'aib rahimahullah mentioned, narrated from his father, from his grandfather, that Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam said that the testimony is not acceptable of number one, is a deceitful man, right, or a deceitful woman, in an adulterer or adulteress, married or unmarried man who has unlawful relationships, and also an enemy who has a grudge against an enemy, right, and he rejected the testimony of one who was dependent on a family, right, that was that particular family. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. عن أبي هريرة رضي الله تعالى عنه أن رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم قال لا تجوز شهادة بدوي على صاحب قرية. رواه أبو داود بن ماجه. Sayyidina Abu Huraira radiallahu ta'ala anhu narrated that Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam said that the testimony of a desert villager is not admissible for a city dweller. In other words, so the city dweller basically is generally ignorant of the commands of Sharia, right? Because obviously it does not come to the standards of witness, according to some, that also is liable to forget and neglect, right? However, if he is a responsible person, a just person, a person who measures up to the standards of a witness, in that case his testimony will then be accepted. However, according to Imam Malik, he goes for the apparent meaning of this hadith, and he rules that the testimony of a villager is not acceptable for a townsman or a city dweller. That other Imam also, however, they have the same opinion like we mentioned before, that if he holds up to the standard of a proper witness and a upright person, and then his testimony will then be accepted.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. وعن عمرو بن مالك رضي الله عنه أن النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم قال 40 ركعتين وقال النبي عليه لما أدبر حسبي الله ونعم الوكيل. وقال النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم إن الله تعالى يلوم على العجز ولازم عليك بالكيس فإذا غلبك أمر فقل حسبي الله ونعم الوكيل. رواه أبو داود. وذكر الخوف من مالك الله said that Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam gave judgment between two men. Then the one who the judgment was given against him said when he went when he said that Allah is sufficient for you in the best of the disposal. Then Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam said that indeed Allah Subhanahu Wa Taala blames upon the one who is unable, but upon him to be intelligent. But when the maker overpowers you, then say, Allah.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. وعن عوف بن مالك أن النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم قضى بين رجلين فقال المقضي عليه لما أدبر حسبي الله ونعم الوكيل. فقال النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم إن الله تعالى يلوم على العجز ولكن عليك بالكيس، فإذا غلبك أمر فقل حسبي الله ونعم الوكيل. رواه أبو داود. Sayyidina Auf bin Malik radiallahu ta'ala anhu narrated that Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam, right, he judged or pronounced judgment in a case between two men, and he right against one whom he pronounced judgment. That person said, as he departed and returned away from the place, he said, Hasbi Allahu wa ni'mal wakil. So Allah is sufficient for us, and He's an excellent guardian. So on that Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam said that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala blames, right, the careless, the one that is careless. In other words, use common sense when you are in difficulty, then you say Hasbi Allahu wa ni'mal wakil. So we find that perhaps it was a debtor's case. In this case, according to mentioned in Madha'ir al-Haq, that it was perhaps a debtor's case, that he might have repaid to the debt, but he didn't as a keep a receipt or a payment, or made anyone witness to the payment. So the creditor had proved and presented his case to Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So he decided in his favor. So we find that debtor called out the words meaning Allah is sufficient. Hasbi Allah wa ni'mal wakil. In other words, to complain that the plaintiff had cheated him. Right? So Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam was very displeased at this point, right? And remarked that it's not good to be careless, right, in one's affairs. In other words, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala condemns a person that is very careless. He cautioned him to exercise his good judgment and in his dealings. Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had given us intellect and common sense, right? And that's a blessing from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. In other words, if anyone happens to commit a blunder or a lapse because of his carelessness, right? And you can't say Allah is sufficient for me, right? Due to his own carelessness. So rather the words must be said when one has basically used up all his efforts, and he tried, right, to acquire that objective or to acquire that whatever he tried to achieve. And then when he fails now, in order to reach it, now obviously, like we said, when he goes through difficulty, now he says, Hasbi Allahu wa ni'mal wakil. Isn't it? Similarly, we find a person going to a dangerous area, for example, knowingly that people there, for example, break into cars or whatever, that's a norm. Isn't it? The urfan. So what he does, he puts his car there and he leaves it open. She's not going to go in. Hasbi, or I put my reliance and trust. Yes, so obviously we put our reliance in one with it. You understand? But at least make some effort to lock the door, make sure this goes now, obviously. After that, Allah will definitely be sufficient. Oh, and ni'mal wakil.
وعن باز بن النبي لم يكن رضي الله تعالى عنه النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم خرج رجلا الله ابي داوود ومالكه ومسلم ولا خرج بعد قال في قول المسلم والسلم
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. وعن بهز بن حكيم عن أبيه عن جده أن النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم حبس رجلا في تهمة. رواه أبو داود وزاد الترمذي ونسائي ثم وخلى عنه أبو داود. Sayyidina Bahz ibn Hakim rahimahullah reported from his father that his grandfather narrated that Nabi Kareem sallallahu alayhi wasallam imprisoned a man on an accusation. Right? So according to another version, he then set him free after that. Right? So the man have been accused by someone. So Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam confined him to such a time that he obtained the testimony of witness, obviously. And then after that, when the plaintiff failed to produce any witness, then Nabi Kareem sallallahu alayhi wasallam acquitted him and set him free. So also this hadith is also proof to show that it is allowed to imprison someone based on an accusation, right? So says that they're proven not guilty or guilty, right?
chapter عن عبد الله بن زبير رضي الله تعالى عنه قال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم أن القصنين في عودان بين أحمد وأبي داود عند طريق عبد الله بن زبير في الله بن النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم الوالد الوليد أحمد أبي بكر.
نعم، بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. عن عبد الله بن الزبير قال قضى رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم أن الخصمين يقعدان بين يدي الحاكم. رواه Abu Ahmad or Abu Dawud. Said Abdullah bin Zubayr radiallahu ta'ala anhu said that Nabi Kareem sallallahu alayhi wasallam decreed that both contending parties, in other words, the plaintiff and the defendant, we also mentioned that nothing is more difficult, for a judge than to be impartial to both the disputants, right? That is to treat them, equally when there is a case before him. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us tawfiq and understanding. Well, in this hadith, inshallah, and then start kitab.